This week I want to get into the process of actually making decisions based on what you determine your purpose is going to be, but I want to make a digression before I get into the process of actually how we go about making decisions. I really think I would like to ask you to examine your life, look back over your life, go back as far as you possibly can, you can remember, and think about what have been the major influences in your life. Now, there are some of us who are arrogant enough or delusional enough to think that we are actually self-made. The fact of the matter is, none of us are self-made. The fact is, we are all born into circumstances that we did not ask for, and if we're lucky, we learn the skills that allow us to essentially play the cards we are dealt from birth as well as we possibly can. Now, I want to give you kind of an example using myself. When I first started this process, I was influenced because I wanted to answer my goddaughter Jalissa's questions about why I am the kind of person I am, why do I make the decisions I make, why do I have the values I have. And as I thought back over my life, essentially I came up with a list. Now, I'm sure if I gave it a lot more thought, the list would be much longer than it is, but I wanted to share with you what I know have been the major influences in my life. Now, some of these things may seem obvious, but when you start to think about it, think about who you are and how you do things and why do you do the things you do and why you want the things you want in life and why you strive for the things you strive for. You will give a lot more credit and you'll give a lot more weight to influences in your life over which you really had no control, but which absolutely affected the way that you feel, the way that you think, your values, your belief systems. Now, I can honestly say the first thing is my parents, my family. I was very fortunate. God, whatever God's plan might be, I won the cosmic lottery when I got my parents. Now, my parents by no means were perfect. I've just written a book that I hope to have published sometime in the next year that goes into all the different things that influenced me, but I'll first start by saying my parents. Now, on a broader scale, I would say my parents' respective families. Both my parents came from families that were very, very different, and yet in many ways had very similar values regarding work, about the place of family and the influence and responsibility the parents should have for children, the way in which we should be loved and given consistent love and consistent discipline, but also the decisions that my parents made even before I was born, thinking in terms of how they wanted me to grow up, who they wanted me to know, what sort of people would they want me to be exposed to, what kind of neighborhoods would they want me to live in, what kind of schools they would want me to go to. Now, I've got my parents, I have my respective families. I was very fortunate to have been born in the middle of the 20th century in the United States. Now, look at me. I'm an African American male, 71 years old. I was born in 1944. Now, had I been born 10 years earlier, had I been born 20 years earlier, certainly if I'd been born 100 years earlier, the prospects and options for my life would have been very, very different than they were being born at the time that I was born. Now, I'm going to be very blunt. I'm not politically correct. And I have to say, for all of the talk and conversation and angst and drama that we go through about race relations, the fact of the matter is our country has changed tremendously in my lifetime. It changed tremendously in the period, the 30 years before, when my father was growing up. It had a tremendous influence on how my father thought and how my father influenced me. It had a tremendous influence on my mother. Very positive influence. Our country changed in ways which actually allowed me to have opportunities far greater than my father had. My father had opportunities far greater than his grandfather had. Now, there's a couple of things to say about that. Our country has phenomenal capacity to change and evolve in very positive ways. I've been the beneficiary of that. Now, I've experienced racism in my life, and there have been times where racism actually hurt me very, very. It was disadvantageous. But I have to also say, there have been times where my experience of racism actually was probably advantageous for me because it gave me something to fight for. Now, another person racism would have broken. Me, I'm the kind of person, I need something to challenge me. And the irony is, racism was one of those things that challenged me. And I'm probably a better person than I would have been had I not had to deal with discrimination. You may think this is odd, but at one time I actually thought about this and I came to the realization that had I been born white and with the same kind of financial and social advantages I had, I probably would have grown up to be rotten. Mainly because I would have taken an easier course. Now obviously there are lots of white guys, my generation, who had challenged lives and met those challenges, and probably in some ways they had the same kind of personality that I had. If they were born in difficult circumstances, it actually made them stronger. So one of the reasons I'm going through this is to understand, when you think about the things that have been influences in your life, you have to realize not everything that's bad is all bad. Not everything that's good is all good. It all depends on how we interpret those experiences we have and what we do with them next. Now, I was also greatly influenced by certain books. One of the books that really influenced me greatly when I was very little, my parents really encouraged me to read from a very early age. I was very blessed. My father and my mother, we had lots of books, okay? But we had particularly encyclopedias, Child's Craft encyclopedias, Encyclopedia Britannicas, and I can tell you something. One of the reasons I really love my father, I really wish he was alive today, from the time I was 7 to about the time I was 10, because my father knew I loved to thumb through the encyclopedia at an age where I didn't really, wasn't really able to understand and read everything. My father, every day, coming home from work, would sit with me after dinner and he would read the encyclopedia with me. Between age 7 and age 10, we read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. I will always cherish and love that memory of my sitting next to my dad, and my dad helping me read through things, and not just reading to me, but helping me actually learn to read and teaching me vocabulary. One of the books that my mother gave me that had a great influence on me was a book called The Greek Way by Edith Hamilton. Now, there was a central idea in The Greek Way that really fascinated me at like age 7, age 8. I was beginning to become aware of some of the political realities in our country, and I realized that black people in general were disadvantaged. We're not the most powerful group. I realized this when I was 7. Now, I had a family. My parents were affluent. By the time I became a teenager, they were actually wealthy. Money made a big difference. Having the advantages of money made a big difference in my life in terms of what I was able to do, the education I was able to pursue, the neighborhood we lived in, and the kinds of people who I knew and were exposed to because of my parents, who were my parents' friends. They were very well educated, very strong people, very wealthy people, generally very wealthy people, very influential people. I grew up being accustomed to being in that environment. It had a tremendous influence on me. Now, in this book I was telling you, The Greek Way by Edith Hamilton, there was one passage when she was talking about how at the Olympic Games, part of the significance of the Olympic Games is that whatever conflicts might be going on between the Greek city-states would stop. And in the Greek Games, the athletes, regardless of what city-state they came from, who were the best, were heroes to everyone. Now, what that taught me as a small child was, even as a little colored boy, knowing I was growing up in a society where being colored or being black was disadvantageous, it taught me that if I really worked hard, if I really strove to be the best I could possibly be at whatever I chose to pursue, then the people who were in power, they might not love me, they might not even like me, but they would respect me. Now, the fact of the matter is, my life has been very, very good. But having learned that principle at an early age was one of the things that helped me develop a great work ethic, but it also helped me to think that what was going to happen in my life, whatever was going to happen in my life, would be largely up to me. And even my enemies might respect me, and someday we might even be friends. if I worked hard and proved that I was as strong and as smart and as valuable as any other person in our culture. Had a tremendous influence on me. Other things that had influences on me, obviously, were, I'd say, mentors that I had the fortune of having throughout my life. And when I say mentors, I mean certain teachers that I had, religious leaders that I was exposed to at my church when I was growing up. Some of my friends' parents had tremendous influences on me, very, very positive influences on me. They all encouraged me to be an excellent student and to be an excellent athlete and to strive. Now, I want you to think in your life, what sort of things had that kind of influence on you? I'll give you an example of another thing that had a great influence on me. I was a little kid. I was kind of a runt. I was very short. Most of the men in my father's family, they tend not to grow. Now, I'm over 6'2" now. But I was about 5'3" until I was almost 18 years old, and then I put on a growth spurt. And I didn't really stop growing until I was 24. But here's what was important about that. When I was in school, particularly when I was in high school, I went to what was called it was a sort of a central city pilot school. It was located between the good neighborhood and bad neighborhood. Now, I grew up in a good neighborhood. But because I was black, one of the things that happened, and I'll be very blunt about this, the kids who came from the ghetto, basically, they thought that the black kids who came from, you might say, the good side of the tracks were spoiled. Maybe some of us were spoiled, but that they looked upon us as being targets, and they attempted to bully us. Now, for whatever reason, the way that my personality was, I've never allowed myself to be bullied. And so when I first dealt with bullies, frankly, what I did is when I had the first opportunity, I beat the shit out of them. Now, that's not politically correct, but the point is that I learned in dealing with people who came from that kind of environment where they tend to, I'll be blunt again, they tend to respect force before they respect reason. So I was not about to be picked on, I was not about to be bullied, and so I beat up the bullies. I actually terrorized the bullies, and I organized the other little black nerds and some of the little white nerds in our high school to fight against, to not allow themselves to be bullied. And we became essentially untouchable. Whatever the bullies and the gangbangers might have wanted to do, they didn't do it to us. Now, that is an attitude that I've carried throughout my whole life. I will not allow myself to be intimidated. Never. Never. I will not buckle under to intimidation. I never have, and I never will. It's not politically correct, but it is what it is, and it has greatly affected the way that I think and function. So, my list is actually a lot longer. I don't want to take the next hour going through the whole list. But all of those things, including teachers that I had that really encouraged me, neighbors, parents and friends of mine who they always wanted to know what my grades were. And so I was always working very hard. Now it happened, I'll tell you this, most of the white people that I grew up with that period of time were Jewish. Most of them were second, third generation from Eastern Europe. And they really, really valued education. My mother, at a very early age, encouraged me to identify with the academic striving, the academic excellence of the Jewish kids. Had a tremendous influence on me. Now, it's not politically correct. It is what it is. But I want you to know that these are some of the things that really greatly influenced me. Now, I'd like you to think about influences in your life and how they have affected the way in which you make decisions, what you believe, how you deal with other people. So, I'm not going to belabor this video any longer. Maybe the next video I'll go into influences a bit more, but I think I've probably given you as much as you can possibly take right now to swallow and think about. So, in the next couple of days, I hope I'll be back with you with another video. You take care now. Cliff Macklin. Bye-bye.